President Trump's push to redraw Indiana's congressional districts has failed, and that right there is the reaction from the crowd of anti-redistricting protesters who were waiting just outside the Senate chambers as the votes were tallied Thursday afternoon. Thanks for joining us for Crossroads Politics here on WTHR+. I'm Dustin Grove.
And I'm Emily Longnecker. The redistricting fight had been building for months, escalating from visits by the vice president to lawmakers receiving bomb threats. At
stake, the razor-thin Republican majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. The GOP controls just 5 seats. They want to keep control next year. National Republicans thought Indiana was a state where they could pick up 2 more in a tough midterm election year.
Yeah, but from the very beginning, it seemed that some Indiana lawmakers were not enthusiastic with the plan. That led to a high-pressure campaign from the White House to convince Indiana state senators to pass redistricting. And like the bill, it came up short in the critical vote. It all came down to this.
19 ayes, 31 noes. This bill has been defeated.
The moment when Hoosiers have finally learned where every Indiana senator stood on redistricting. With a red for no, a green for yes next to their names. The vote total came late Thursday afternoon, after more than 3 hours of impassioned speeches on either side of the issue. Much of it between Republicans on opposite sides of the debate.
I believe the bill on its face is unconstitutional.
The only way we can bolster Republican voices in Congress is to do this.
In the end, 21 Republicans sided with Democrats to end the talk of mid-decade redistricting, at least for this session. Since last month, Senate President Pro Tem Rod Bray had warned the votes in favor of redistricting weren't there among Republicans in the Senate. After Thursday's vote, Bray said it came down to different ideas among Republicans on the best way to keep control of the U.S. House in the 2026 midterm election. Bray has said before that should come through campaigning and trying to flip Indiana's first district.
It really comes down to an issue of having the same goal but a different way to process that.
In recent weeks, Bray has faced online criticism from President Trump with threats to primary any Republicans who didn't support redistricting. He was also asked Thursday if he's concerned Indiana could lose federal funding.
We've had lots of conversations with folks in Washington, D.C. Indiana will continue to function and do well.
When asked how the redistricting vote would impact the Senate's working relationship moving forward with Governor Braun and the Indiana House who passed redistricting.
We're going to find a way to work together. This is what we do for Hoosiers.
Democrats pleased with the results.
Hoosiers repeatedly said, we do not want. And it's exciting to know that we listened to them.
But Senate Minority Leader Shelley Yoder said until the votes came down, she wasn't sure of the outcome.
There's a red button, there's a green button, and you're picking one or the other.
And on this issue, it was more Republicans picking the red button than the green one that brought an end to a long-fought debate.
And we are joined now by political analyst Brandon Smith, who is now Public Relations Director at Hirons. He spent years covering the State House. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Really happy to be here.
So, were you surprised by this vote? It was pretty decisive.
Yeah, I was surprised by the final margin. I think leading up to the actual vote on the day of, I mean, Rod Bray had been saying for months, we don't have the votes, we don't have the votes. And I was hearing 28 no votes kind of on the day of that people were kind of confident in. I think 31 no votes, that is a large margin. That is more than more than half of the Senate GOP caucus who voted against this package, and that was surprising. What's really interesting, too, is that under the sort of normal procedures in the Senate, and this is true in the House and it's been true under both parties, is that usually a piece of legislation or an amendment doesn't get called down on the floor if at least half of the caucus doesn't agree to it, even if it could have passed overall maybe. We've seen that time and time again where things just don't get called down. This got called down when clearly they didn't have the support of at least half the caucus.
You know, another thing that Senator Bray said is that he was worried that redistricting could backfire, that this would, do so-called dummy mander, where redrawn districts actually cost the party in power votes. But sitting in the Senate chamber on Friday, we did not hear a lot of that argument. Why do you think the vote failed, Brandon?
Well, I mean, you heard from the folks who got at least to the microphone and talked about their opposition to it, is they just didn't like the sort of political gamesmanship at play here, that this was setting a bad precedent. And quite frankly, even some of the proponents of the measure have talked about they don't like this process. I mean, Ben Smaltz, who was the House author of the bill, said that he wants Congress to ban mid-decade redistricting. Right. Speaker Todd Huston has said the same thing. So I don't think there were a ton of people who loved this whole process, even those who supported it. But I think ultimately, those arguments might have been made in caucus amongst Republicans, but on the floor they didn't feel the need to say it. But I think it was something that had percolated throughout this entire process is, are we setting ourselves up for unintended consequences that will ultimately hurt us more than help us? Not just at the congressional level, but sort of the trickle-down effect at the state legislative seats. So maybe you can, the map that was drawn seemed to safely protect all of those seats for Republicans, unless it was like a massive landslide kind of year for the other party. But what it does do is it gets voters in those districts more engaged. Democrats may be more angry, Republicans even who didn't like this happening, and clearly there were plenty of them in the State House, more engaged in state legislative seats that otherwise would have been safe for Republicans.
Do you think these state lawmakers have something to worry about in these upcoming primaries and elections over the next couple of years? Senator Young, I mean, kind of alluded to that when he got up there and said, I like everyone, we know what's about to happen here.
I think they are absolutely on watch now, for sure. I mean, if the folks who have been threatening these political consequences follow through with the money particularly, that could have an impact on these primary races, especially for some lawmakers in the Senate particularly who maybe haven't had to run a tough primary or a primary at all in a long time. That's not uncommon in a lot of these seats for them just to not have a primary opponent in the first place. So it could absolutely have an impact, but for some of them, they're retiring. Some of them, they aren't up until 28. So will this last all the way until then with all of the things that will inevitably happen between now and then? I don't know.
You know, when we interviewed Senator Kreider earlier this week, he said he was against redistricting, and he said that he thought that you were going to see an awful lot of retirements coming up and people stepping away from the process because they just didn't like how all of this went.
I think that's, I mean, you're already starting to see that a little bit. I mean, Senator Kyle Walker, who's in the Indy area, made his announcement that he wasn't running for re-election just in the last couple of weeks. Others have already said that they're stepping away. I think part of it was also the threats of violence, the swatting, the bomb threats. Like, if that continues, and I mean, there's reasons to think it at least might, at least in the short term, are they going to want to go through this again and again and again? I wouldn't blame anyone who stepped away at this point.
Senator Kreider this week told me, that he had threats of his house being firebombed, just 3 threats this week alone as they led up to the vote. So that was just very troubling for folks, to say the least.
So President Trump, as we mentioned, had been pushing for this. Vice President Vance had been here twice. So we heard from the president, got some reaction from him after the vote. Let's go to that if we can.
One day, I won Indiana all 3 times by a landslide, and I wasn't working on it very hard. Would have been nice. I think we would have picked up 2 seats if we did that.
All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no.
So that was President Trump, obviously not pleased, but also saying that he didn't try very hard.
Well, I think he was saying he didn't try very hard in his elections here, which is true. He didn't have to spend much time in Indiana, at least for the general elections in 16, 20, or 24. And he's absolutely right. He won by a landslide every time.
Pretty easy.
That's part of what did make this ultimately surprising. I wasn't surprised that it failed sort of on the day of because of everything that had been building up to it. But if you'd told me, 5 months ago when this conversation started happening, that this was definitely not going to happen in Indiana, I would have been shocked.
It was more than half the Republican caucus in the Senate, and as we mentioned, they could be primaried. But do you really think, especially those who are up for re-election in, say, 2028, do you think there is enough of a memory, enough of a priority to primary them?
We'll see. I mean, so much can change between now and 2028. In terms of the group that has pledged to spend all of this money here, I think we'll see that in 2026, certainly. But will they want to spend those time and resources in Indiana, 3 years from now, 2.5 years from now? There could be a lot of other things going on. I think it's way too early for those lawmakers to be worried at this point.
Right. Okay. After the vote on Thursday night, I had a chance to speak with Congressman Andre Carson. He represents District 7, as you know, in Indianapolis. He is one of 2 Democratic congressmen from Indiana being targeted by the redistricting push. Here's what he had to say about last night's vote.
The majority of Hoosiers don't agree with this very unfair proposal. Hoosiers made sure that folks at the State House knew it, and they listened. And, I've been saying all along, Hoosiers are different. you know, we're different. We have a very independent streak that we're very proud of. Donald Trump thought he could bully his way into getting what he wants in Indiana, and it was a grave miscalculation.
And the other district that Republicans were trying to redraw was District 1 in northwestern Indiana. That is a district that has gone from blue to purple in recent elections. Do you think Republicans can flip that in 2026 even without redistricting?
It's certainly on the table. It's been trending in that direction especially since they redrew the congressional maps in the normal course of redistricting a few years ago. It is, as you said, becoming a purple district. It has an incumbent, which helps the Democrats up there, and Frank Mervan, who's been there, now for a couple of cycles. But it'll be one of the races that Republicans are targeting next year for sure.
I mean, and Senator Bray said that's what he wanted to do, the old-fashioned way, I guess, campaigning, and he thought that was the way to go about this, to get that seat.
Because they had gotten so close, was it two elections ago?
Yeah, and that was the first one where the incumbent had left, Mervan was in, it was a new map, and that, I think, he padded his lead a little bit last time. Now, nationally, we're looking at what might be a tough year for Republicans in congressional races in the midterms, which is part of why this redistricting stuff is happening at all. So it might be a tough time for Republicans to try and pick it up, but it's on the table.
Brendan, in watching last night, what did you think of kind of the speeches where each of the Republicans, they kind of addressed each other on the other side if they had different opinions, the Republicans saying, look, we'll love each other. We love each other now. We'll love each other afterwards. Do they kiss and make up after this among themselves? And then what about the working relationship with the governor going forward?
I think they'll definitely kiss and make up with themselves. That almost always happens, even in tough fights that they've had before. I think you'll see that happen now, especially since there will be a little bit of a gap between this and then when the sort of regular session picks up in January. I don't think you'll see too many issues there. And as far as the working relationship with Governor Braun, I mean, he did explicitly threaten all of the folks on the Senate Republican caucus who voted against this redistricting bill. But at the same time, my guess is a lot of Governor Braun's priorities will be the same priorities that Senate Republicans had. So I don't know that you'll see too many speed bumps for whatever Braun's agenda is.
And it seems like both Democrats and Republicans, when they're talking about priorities, have also talked about affordability issues. At least that's what I was hearing this week.
Absolutely, which is why I think you're not going to see too many things that the governor and the Senate Republicans clash on, at least not in the short session.
All right. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your insight.
Thanks for having me.
If it's a continued giving and giving and giving, there has to be, as with any business or any entity, there has to be a breaking point.
Indiana school district leaders say they are facing a financial crisis. We're going to talk about the property tax reform impact and the future of school funding coming up. But first, lawmakers take aim at cell phones in the classroom. What a new bill could mean for teachers, kids, and parents. It's next on Crossroads Politics. Should students be allowed to have their cell phone in class? Indiana said no 2 years ago, but now the law may get even stricter and ban cell phones, personal laptops, and smartwatches for the whole school day. Bell to bell, as they say. Alex Appleton covers education for Chalkbeat Indiana, joins me to break this down. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So as it stands now, this cell phone ban applies only to instructional time. So literally when students are in the classroom learning. Is that right?
Right. That's what state law says. And there's a lot of variation from school to school. But what the state law says is that students can't have their cell phones during instructional time unless a teacher says it's okay to use that device for learning purposes.
Okay, so but this law would ban those devices really from school for the entire day without exception. Tell me more about that.
Right. The law specifies that the cell phones either need to be put away in a secured storage pouch or left at home completely. And it's going to be up to districts to decide which sort of path they prefer to take on that. The other thing it says is that any sort of learning that's going to happen on a device needs to happen on a school-issued device. So that's a departure for a lot of schools where students can maybe take those personal laptops in, take them home to learn on. Now they're targeting more of like a bank of Chromebooks, a bank of iPads that's available for learning and then put away.
Kind of like the old school computer lab back in the day, right?
Back in the day, yes.
So is there any pushback on this?
Yeah, there's a little bit of pushback from parents who are anxious about not being able to reach their students during the school school day. They were anxious about that when the instructional time ban went into effect too. One interesting thing I've heard from schools is actually it kind of sometimes makes students stressed out or anxious to get texts from their parents in the middle of the school day. So it is a boon to their behavior if they don't have that happening. Students too say that they're not looking to waste time on their cell phones, but they like to listen to music while they're doing their homework, while they're doing studying. So we might see some pushback from them too.
Do other states do this? Have they adopted this?
Lots of states have adopted, especially a bell-to-bell cell phone ban. They say they're pointing to academic benefits that they say come as a result of these bans.
Okay, so we expect to see this at least perhaps debated on the floor?
I think it's a high priority for lawmakers.
Okay, I know you'll continue to cover it. You can read Alexandra Appleton's story on Chalkbeat Indiana online. Thanks for being here, as always.
Thank you so much.
And while lawmakers target cell phones in the classroom, schools are turning to voters to try and keep classrooms open. A financial crisis in the state's public schools. That's what we're hearing from some school superintendents. It's next on Crossroads Politics. A new survey shows 9 out of 10 public school superintendents in Indiana expect this year's property tax changes to hurt their budgets. And for some, it could be especially painful. This survey was done by the Indiana Coalition for Public Education and first reported by our partners at the Indiana Capitol Chronicle. And it really paints kind of a dim picture in some cases for some of these districts. Almost 100% of districts are at least considering cuts to support and teaching staff. 90% say they're at least considering cuts to facilities. More than 60% are at least considering a referendum to raise more money. Dr. Robert Taylor is a veteran school administrator and currently serves as executive director for the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents. Dr. Taylor, thanks for joining us.
Dustin, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and join you today.
I want to read to you 2 superintendents' comments in this survey. These were anonymous. The first is in a rural district with between 1,500 and 2,500 students. They write, "We have no choice but to either pass an operating a referendum or eliminate transportation. We're also riffing a reduction in force, $1.3 million of positions at the end of the 25-26 school year." And then you got an urban district superintendent saying, "I cannot pay my utility bill. We face inflation and new laws and utility increases. We cannot survive these increases without help." So my first question to you is, are these outliers or is this the general consensus among public school leaders right now?
Well, I think, Dustin, that it is a general feeling that some of the constraints that may surface out of Senate Enrolled Act 1 could have a significant financial impact on many of the areas of operation of schools, not only in the classroom, but in the basic day-to-day requirements that are needed to deliver students safely from home to the school building and return, to ensure they're fed, to ensure it's a safe and secure learning environment. All of that, while it requires a lot of dedication from our educators, from the classroom teacher to the paraprofessional to the school administrator and superintendent, it does require a financial commitment to be able to pay for those services and ensure that those services are benefiting the educational program and not distracting from the learning process.
Is this, I think some people are wondering and have even voiced concern that, well, public school districts, maybe they should tighten their belts just like everybody else. Is this a political argument or is this an actual, hey, we got to keep the lights on here. We got to keep teachers paid here?
So it's a great question. And in some aspects, it has a political ramification because obviously it comes through state statute. I will say here in the last part of my career as executive director, I've had the privilege of working at the State House, and I'm quite honored, impressed by the democratic process, and have met a number of legislators that are dedicated and committed to educating Indiana youth. But there are political considerations, and while education is a very large part of the Indiana budget, I think what we're talking about is the future of Indiana. And so you can't really put a political impact on the education of a child. I think part of it too is, though, a reality check. Our educators, our administrators, our classroom teachers know what it takes to provide a good educational program. And when there is the slightest indication that this is another tightening of the financial belt, when they feel like over the last post-COVID era, say from 2002 on, it's been a continual tightening of the belt. And that's, education is not unique, but education is probably the spotlight service that we provide our citizens here in Indiana that guarantees a good future. And so if it's a continued giving and giving and giving, there has to be, as with any business or any entity, there has to be a breaking point. And there's greater concern that we're getting closer and closer to that diminished return of taxpayer investment into education.
So is the solution referendum? I mean, we've seen more districts going to the public and saying, all right, here's what we need. Are you willing to pay for this?
Well, certainly here in Indiana, several years ago, it was decided that referendum would be part of the options that school corporations had to provide local control and local determination to an aspect of school funding. And so public schools have embraced that. The referendum's a reality, and quite honestly, we've been fairly successful. But what that really is that's a local community saying with their vote that we support and endorse facilities, compensation for staff members and salaries, whatever the referendum is designed to cover, but that is a local determination. And so the referendum process, as it is currently under statute, has benefited a number of Indiana schools. You know, it is a bit frustrating though, because it is designed to be a local determination. Recently we've had some elected individuals that have interjected their sentiment, and they were not part of the local community. They weren't local taxpayers. They just, for whatever reason, were opposed to the process or in opposition to public schools. So having the referendum being available is an asset that schools have taken advantage of and quite honestly have been very successful. And in the end, the beneficiary of this process are students. Staff and students who receive a fair and compensation for salary, and students who receive an optimum educational program. And if the referendum process is approved by the local community, they then can take the success, or they then have the accountability for whatever the determination is.
That's a lot of work for school districts.
It has
it's
been.
Hiring a consultant to figure out what the questions are, how you word it, how you campaign for it. That's a big task, isn't it?
It is a very big task, you know, but educators are well known for their continued quest of knowledge and learning the referendum process, which is really a political process, going from, teaching first grade or teaching AP chemistry to helping your community understand the needs and benefits that could come from a past referendum. It has been an ongoing process, but I think one that has been embraced and in most cases has been successful. And I think those communities that have gone ahead and endorsed and passed those referendums fully understand whatever the impact, either small or large, on their tax obligations will produce. So yeah, it's no one goes to college to be a teacher and takes a class 101 on how to pass a referendum. So they kind of learn that as they go.
You represent how many public schools?
We have 293 public school corporations in the state of Indiana, and so IAPSS, the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents, represents all of those superintendents. And in addition, we have a number of assistant superintendents, central office personnel, and a few college individuals as well.
So are they asking you at this point to go to the State House and say, hey, we need to tweak some legislation here, or?
Very much so, and to be quite honest, and in compliment to a number of our legislators in both the House and Senate Education Committees, they've been open and understand that there needs to be some adjustment. I think Senate Enrolled Act 1 was the result of a perfect storm of situations where we have a new governor coming on board. There's an effort to look at tax reduction across the state. I don't think anybody, myself included, who's a taxpayer, oppose tax reduction. But there also has to be an understanding that at what point is there a negative impact of those taxes. So we are continually working with our legislators, working with our local members, and keep in mind too, SEA 1 just does impact schools. Cities and towns, and the mayors and those individuals, the councilmen, the county councilmen, law enforcement, fire, a number of those agencies that support communities, such as education, are impacted by this as well. So there's a continual discussion, and I look forward to that. And as I say, we've started that with a number of legislators. How do we make this a little more, a little less impactful, a little more of support, and not so much the restriction that it appears that it's going to put forth now.
Okay. The conversation continues. Appreciate you. Dr. Robert Taylor, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
We're getting new insight into a change in leadership for the Indianapolis City County Council. President Vop Osili just announced he will not run again for the council's top post. The Democrat says he will stay on the council as he considers his next step. Many have speculated that next step is a run for mayor in 2027. At this point, current Mayor Joe Hogsett has not confirmed his plans. We talked with UIndy political science professor Laura Wilson about the state of a race that may be wide open for candidates from both parties.
Oh, this certainly does lead into the possibility that Osili might be considering running for mayor in the future. And there are a lot of good reasons that he would have this interest. He's served in the City County Council for over 13 years. He has been president of the City County Council for quite some time. And so that shows not only an interest in terms of leadership, but also experience with regards to Indianapolis City County government.
In Osili's statement about his decision, he says, stepping back from the presidency allows me to focus my energy where it's most needed and continue serving our city with the same commitment that has guided my work from the beginning. Time will tell where that service takes him next. And that does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. For Brandon Smith, Emily Longnecker, and all of us here at 13 News, I'm Dustin Grove. Thanks for joining us. We hope to see you next time.